Welcome to the Non-Beta Alpha Podcast, your source for unique insights into current market trends, with host Ryan Morfin, CEO of Wentworth Management Services. Today we're talking with Austin Manis, Chief Operating Officer of Harvest Returns, to discuss the current state of the agriculture industry. Is now the time to invest in agriculture? And if so, is there more opportunity to be had by investing in U.S. agriculture markets or foreign agriculture markets? Find out today. This show is brought to you by Status Jet. Elevate your status.
Austin, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
So you're the CEO of Harvest Returns, and would love to hear a little bit about what you guys do with investor capital in the agriculture industry.
So our main focus has been production agriculture. So we are looking at ways that we can connect investors with producers that are, making our food or the material for our houses and our clothing. And so the best way we found to do that was through the crowdfunding model. And that's basically how we connect the dots there.
And so you guys your website, if you want to do a plug on the website, people go to that website, investors go to that website, and they can pick an allocation into some farmland or an agricultural deal?
Yeah, absolutely. So harvestreturns.com is how you find us. And we have an online platform where investors can go and search different farms, ranches, timberland, ag businesses, and they can kind of pick and choose, what's their flavor or what is their risk return profile. Some investments will be strictly for accredited investors. Some will be open to unaccredited investors. So we try to make that as accessible as possible. And then we have investment minimums that are anywhere between, as low as $5,000 as an entry point. Can go up to $25,000 as a minimum, and so that's we want inclusion, and so we want all investors to be able to play, and we want farms to be able to have the success. And so this is using that online platform is how we make that happen, and we market those businesses to those investors.
And given where the stock market is, hard assets are definitely something investors should be paying attention to. Why is agricultural land or agricultural investments? Why is it interesting for investors? And how do you guys? What are some current types of investments that you guys have closed recently?
Great question. And so as long as people are on this planet, we're going to need agriculture. So there's some safety there, but of course there's always risk, like any investment. And with ag, sometimes it's weather. Well, ag businesses have found out a way to mitigate that with indoor climate control. So you can kind of go through each type of ag business, but it will always be a necessity. And then when you look at kind of the risk return profiles, that agriculture has outpaced the stock market in the last 70 years. It's not sexy, but it's steady. And so for investors that need something, when they're diversifying their portfolio, that they need something. If they're smart, they're putting something into an alternative investment like ag or minerals and things like that. So we want to provide that, and so the importance there is, as we've recently learned through the last year that we've experienced, that the food system, when it takes a shock like a pandemic, people hurt and people suffer, people go hungry. There's not enough of a something on the market, and so that's why we feel it's important. I mean, like I said, as long as there are people on this planet, and oh, by the way, that population keeps growing and growing every day. So that's kind of why our, propaganda is around, like, ag is important.
Yeah, no, look, and it's not correlated to the stock market, right? So it's like you said, it's steady returns, and food security was a really big deal last spring. People were starting to get worried about our supply chain. Just from a macro view, during COVID when it first kicked off, were you guys at all concerned about the supply chain of our food supply?
So initially, absolutely. Like any business, as we started to watch this unfold, how is this going to play into our business specifically, but then how is it going to affect the food system? And so what we saw firsthand, based on investments that we had already made, is that those big centralized nodes in the supply chain are at risk. And Chris, our CEO, Chris Raleigh, and I, spent some time in the military, and we saw that during deployments, where if you have these big giant bases in a combat zone, that is where all of the attention is going to be focused, good and bad. And so, when you see all those smaller unit bases sprawled out across the desert, that's always like, man, the ag system needs that. And so, like our beef producers that we invested in were kind of focused mainly on the regional area processors, as opposed to say like a big Tyson Smithfield kind of giant meat processor. And so they had incredible success during the pandemic of connecting their product to grocery store shelves because they were connected to producers at the regional and local level, and not necessarily, had the giant contracts from like a Walmart or a Kroger or something like that. So the pandemic showed that if you are aligned properly at the right levels, you can weather those kind of storms. If you are solely focused on centralization and cutting down costs and things like that, then you are opening the doors to something catastrophic, as we see.
And so what type of investment returns can investors look to obtain? And, I'm not saying in any specific deal, but just on average, what is the ag sector's like targeted returns for an investment?
No, great question. And we get that a lot from investors. It's quite the spectrum. And again, every deal has its own risk return profile. The spectrum, I can tell you, will range from, we've got some cattle notes that spit out 8% annual ROI to some more risky deals that are more technological based indoor agriculture that could, projected to produce anywhere from 40 to 50% IRR over about a 5-year period. So again, we want to provide investors with whatever their flavor is. What level of risk are they willing to accept, and what returns are they looking for? And then it's also, investors tell us all the time, hey, I'm okay to sit on this for a couple of years. My money's, I'm good. And then we've got investors that say, I want mailbox money. I want a quarterly check. They have specific things that they're looking for. And we work with those ag producers to build those structures to provide exactly what investors want.
No, that sounds very interesting. And what are some? So you said cattle moats. What are some typical deals? The last few deals that you guys have done, like what's the size of the investment you guys have made?
So the successes we've had that just keep coming back around, and investors just keep asking for it. We've done quite a few cattle notes with several different producers that are on different parts of the U.S. And those are usually debt deals. Just the way the cattle business is, that structure seems to work well. So investors are equity investors, and then into an investment vehicle, and that investment vehicle loans money to those producers. Other types of structures, we've done some profit sharing models. We do just straight up equity into some of the companies. That may be, like I said, a 3 to 5 year wait until you can get that giant indoor facility built and start selling your tomatoes to Whole Foods. So the typical size raises where we found the sweet spot in the market is somewhere in the realm of like $400,000 on the low end, up to about 1.5 to 2 million on the top end. And that is the size of businesses that we're typically dealing with. There's plenty of businesses much larger, and there's plenty of smaller farms, but that are just not producing at the scale that would produce good returns for our investors. So that's the sweet spot we've found on the raise size.
That's interesting. And there's a lot of articles out there talking about the consolidation of large farm companies that are just buying all this land from the small farmers. Is that as an early trend, or have they gobbled up all the farmland, or is our farm still very fragmented? Is there still a small American farmer out there producing?
Oh, absolutely. I think I can't remember the exact numbers, 90+% of farms are still what you would consider family owned. And that's farms that are not just like hobby farms. They're actually businesses producing revenue. And the misconception that a lot of people have, especially if they had not spent a lot of time in the heartland or in the parts of the country that are farmland, a lot of those trends and perceptions are related to giant row crop farms in Iowa, Nebraska, places like that. And those are large companies buying up large tracts of soybeans, corn, wheat, the things that are traded, when you go to Chicago and talking about, trading commodities, that's what that perception is. But what people are learning and don't understand is there's so much more to it. There's all of these companies across the United States and across the world that are early stage tech companies that are providing some kind of ag tech, or they're an early stage company that's building a very sophisticated indoor hydroponic greenhouse. And so, if you're a beer drinker and you've seen the rise of the craft beer and what investors, or I should say beer drinkers, are looking for. We've seen that. And so that's the same thing happens in other industries as well, just like ag. So there's absolutely plenty of quality mid-range small companies out there that are being successful and are much more agile to outside effects, as we just talked about with like the beef and COVID. So there's plenty of these. You could call them mom and pop, you call them family farms, but there's absolutely plenty of them that are doing well in the United States and around the world.
Well, a big piece of legislation that came out in the last administration was the USMCA, and I know there is, some we'll call price differences between produce grown in Mexico and produce in the United States. How did USMCA, did it protect the American farmer, or did it, help, kind of undercut the U.S. farmer from foreign competition?
Well, and again, we try not to group everything ag under one kind of umbrella, because if you're a corn farmer, soybean farmer, you're absolutely wondering what the Chinese are doing based on their culture and their dietary and energy needs. If you're an avocado farmer, I'm sure you're paying attention to like USMCA and like where are these things coming across the border. So there's a lot of dimensions there, and price points and things like that, of course, people are focused on. But if you are shipping an avocado from somewhere in central Mexico to a grocery store in New Hampshire, the price is a factor, but that time distance is also a factor. And I think produce, the rate for a distance like that is something like a 40 to 45% loss rate for produce that's got to travel that distance. And oh, by the way, it's got to meet certain pesticide requirements and things like that. So that stuff's going to have chemicals on it having to travel that far. So yes, price is something that people are focused on, but more and more consumers are focused on the, grown locally, limit that distance it's got to travel, limit the hands it's got to go through before it gets from the tree or the soil to my plate. And so the USMCA, we're absolutely paying attention to that. Farmers are paying attention to that to see how that's going to be, long term, what that's going to do. But like anything in ag, it moves at the speed of biology. And so even though the law was just passed in early, not too long ago in our lifetimes, it will take some time to see if there are long-lasting positive and negative effects to it.
Well, you brought up a great question. U.S. farmers are paying attention to trends in China now, just given kind of trade impacts. How did the trade war impact the agricultural industry? And I believe a big part of normalizing relations during the Trump administration was that they had to have huge amounts of agricultural imports from the United States. Did they live up to their end of the bargain, and how have we seen that impact kind of production in the States?
Wow, yeah, so a mouthful there. What I can say just from our foxhole, not to get too in the weeds on it, there are things that obviously happening overseas that will affect what the U.S. farmer does, and everybody knows that. Things that we just kind of read and try to keep up on are the fact that Chinese had to slaughter hundreds of millions of hogs because of African swine flu. That will affect U.S. soybean prices. That will affect U.S. meat prices. And so we're obviously paying attention to that. The businesses that we're dealing with, as I mentioned before, are eyeballing those things on the horizon, those international markets. But they are growing at a scale, at a level that is mostly domestic sales. And so a beef producer or a cherry tomato producer that we're talking to here domestically is probably focused on, Whole Foods or the Trader Joe's in their tri-state area as their market. And that's based, again, based on kind of the deal sizes we're doing, the types of companies that we're talking to. They are eyeballing the horizon, but they're not quite at the point to ship containers of stuff, over to China. So it is very important, and absolutely people should be paying attention to it, especially if it affects our bigger economy. But we know that people are out there buying up large tracts of land in South America, Africa, places like that, getting a hold of water rights. I read something the other day that said Bill Gates had bought up 242,000 acres of farmland over the last year. Gee, I wonder why he's doing that, because obviously it's important. So there's things like that people definitely need to be paying attention to when they're looking at investments.
And the Emiratis buy a lot of land globally. Do you see a lot of foreign buying, governments buying, land that is good for farming in the States, or is it still mainly owned by U.S. landowners?
So again, kind of separating the wheat from the chaff, or the giant row crop farm versus kind of the companies that we're doing, more specialty ag. For sure, we've heard of plenty of the in the land conferences where there are foreign entities that are looking to own the American breadbasket. If you consider anyone in the Middle East, we've been to a lot of conferences virtually and in person where Middle Eastern wealth folks are looking at controlled environment very, very deeply. How can they grow the produce that they need in their environment? And so that's a big focus for theirs. And then we've seen some successes where, if you're talking greenhouses and you're talking indoor growing, there's probably a Dutch or an Israeli company involved, because they've cracked the nut on it, and they've been pouring money into their R&D for those specific types of growing places. So yeah, we've definitely seen the interest internationally. We've done a few international deals ourselves. We've got some cocoa out in West Africa and some down in Central America. And we see the Europeans are focused on, how do I keep getting quality cocoa up here, and that it be fair trade, and no child labor, and our wages spread evenly across genders. So the focuses are going out there, and international businesses or companies in those emerging markets are trying to adapt to the international interest that's out there.
Well, it's interesting. So with the new administration coming in, and a lot of policy changes, especially in the energy sector, do you think that biofuels can be part of the Biden energy program, and do they make sense from your perspective without subsidies?
So the biofuels for sure are going to continue to grow. In my off time when I'm not sitting here at the office, I'm kind of a car nut. Do a lot of stuff, and I've watched where a company like Ford Motor Company has announced that it will be emissions. Its new vehicles after 2035, I believe, are going to be emissions free. They're adapting their own company based on what they perceive the regulatory world's going to be like by that time. Biofuels actually are going to be something important. We raised money for a company that did spirulina, kind of an algae that they can grow on sheets of plastic. And they were using obviously for a protein source, alternative protein source, but there's lots of money being poured into green algae that can produce fuel, biodiesels and stuff like that. So the regulatory world and the markets are obviously going to bounce back. They're going to play on each other. And we'll definitely see how that go. And the farmers are trying to figure that out as well. Like, if they're still continuing to use farm diesel out there in the middle of the United States, what are they going to have to do when they have to switch over to a battery operated tractor that's about $800,000 piece of equipment? Well, now it's $1.2 million because it's that technology had to change, and they're going to need the capital to do so. So we know that it's going to happen, and so we're just working with the producers to figure out what are their needs going to be.
And a lot of people don't think about this, but there's been a lot of money injected into the economy from these COVID stimulus packages. The agricultural sector got about $13 billion, I believe, in the last round. Did the industry need it, and why?
I would say absolutely. The why, there's a lot of whys. When you talk to a company like Kroger's or Walmart, it's not sustainable for them to continue to have E. coli recalls for lettuce. Like that is just dangerous for their business. They have got to figure out how to get producers that are closer to them, have better quality control procedures, have the equipment necessary to test or catch these kind of outbreaks before they even happen. So that kind of investment in the ag sector is going to help alleviate some of that issue. The other issue is consumer demands are changing. People want grass-fed burgers. They want free-range chicken. They want alternative sources of proteins. The consumer is demanding that. And so for a producer to provide that to the market, they have got to update their systems, maybe get a little bit of education. So there's a lot of things that business has to do to meet consumer demand. So like I said, there's a lot of whys, but absolutely that money was needed in the ag community.
Well, you bring up some good points, and I actually just ask you a personal question. So like when you go to the grocery store, do you really seek out organic vegetables and fruit for yourself over non? And is it that big of a difference?
Well, that's a good question, and let's say I'd probably go with a little bit of bias as what I've learned, working here. The words like organic and natural and things like that, while we understand in our brains what those mean, they don't necessarily mean what they mean when you see them on a sticker at the grocery store. And there are plenty of, whether it's a government or agencies or private organizations that are trying to focus attention on making sure when you read a label that what you're reading and what your brain understands is the truth. So anyone can just put a sticker on their meat or veggie or whatever and say this was naturally grown. Well, everything is naturally grown. Even if it's grown in a petri dish, it still grew naturally. So that's you got to watch that kind of stuff. To get back to your question, I do focus on that a little bit just because of what I've learned. And sometimes it's when you see behind the curtain, it scares you a little bit, when you order food, you start to think, wow, I know how they make this. So I'm going to take an extra second and think, do I really want to buy this product versus this product? So, long answer to your question, but yes, I do look at that. But I kind of look at it with a grain of salt.
Well, and it's interesting, going to eggs for a second. I think you mentioned that. I mean, is there a big difference on, let's just say buying a package of eggs that are, free range versus just straight up organic? I mean, I was told that maybe free range eggs are, have more bacteria in them. It's interesting because you think something, you're paying a premium, but it may not be as good for you. I just don't know if you have a comment on that.
Well, it's just in the egg specific, when you talk about pasture raised chickens or free range, stuff like that. We saw, just an example, we were talking to a company that was focused on the fact that California was passing legislation to say by such and such date, I can't remember the year, like 2025, all eggs sold in California grocery stores must be certified free range, cage free eggs. So there is probably some science about, does this egg taste different than that egg? Are there more bacteriums in this than the other one? There's probably that out there, and people should pay attention to it. But most of that is driven, that lobbying is driven from, I want to eat this egg, and I want to make sure as a consumer that the animal that produced it was just not confined to a 1 foot by 1 foot space and was miserable. And so there's plenty of reasons why people want that cage-free egg. And that absolutely drives what producers are going to do, because if the distributors want it, if the consumer wants it, the retailers want it, the distributors want it, then the producers have to produce it. I mean, it's just how it goes. And so producers are going to adjust their methods to meet consumer demands because they have to sell them. And, that's the way life is.
And is there a big difference between grass-fed beef and, corn-fed beef?
Well, and usually when you're talking grass-fed beef, you're really talking about how the animal is finished. So every cow is grass-fed. That's how they live. The last few moments of their life, which could be, a couple months or something like that, before they're processed, that's how they are finished. And so if an animal is grain finished, you'll have a nice, juicy, well-marbled ribeye that has a lot of fat in it. If you have a grass-finished steak, you better know how to cook that, because you can turn it into leather real quick. And that's basically just what, the fat content, things like that. So obviously we all love juicy steaks, but if you're trying to have a leaner diet and maybe less fat in your diet, you maybe want the grass-fed, grass-finished steak. And so it is more difficult to get an animal to the weight that you would like to process it if it's grass-finished, because there's less fat in it. If you're a grain-finished producer, you're trying to get that cow as fat as you can, because the system is built around weight. And if that's all we're going to determine the value of the animal is just on how gravity affects it on the Earth's surface, then we're going to be limited on what we can do. And so the producers are going to produce what you ask them for. If they want a 1,200 pound steer, they're going to give you a 1,200 pound steer. It might be full of junk, but it's going to be 1,200 pounds. And so the grass-fed guys understand, like, hey, the diets of people need to change. That's what they're asking for. So we're going to produce an animal and get it as heavy as we can, but it's not going to be full of junk. It's going to be full of something that the animal would eat naturally.
Well, I'm going to keep asking some of these questions because these are things I've been dying to ask someone who's knowledgeable. So you had a military career in the Middle East. The eggs when you're in the Dubai, for instance, the yolks are just a lot oranger than the ones that we have in the States. What causes that? Is it the water supply or?
Yeah, it could, what is their source? There's 1,000 different or more different breeds of chickens. Where are they getting them? Are they getting them from Australia? Are they getting them from Africa? Are they getting them from the United States? And so, you can go around the world and find different products. If you eat beef anywhere in the United States, and this is coming from a guy that lives in Texas, it's probably not going to be as good as an American steak. The Australians, the Argentine, folks, those are beef producers. But when you go somewhere and you taste an Australian steak and you taste something that was raised in the United States, you're gonna have a totally different experience. And that's why U.S. beef is getting such attention in growing Asian markets, because when the Chinese middle class or the South Korean middle class is growing, like, man, I'm tired of this beef that tastes like garbage, and the American beef is just so much better. That demand starts to grow, and so you'll see differences in product, around the globe like that.
And is that genetics of the cattle, or is that the way we treat them, or is it just a different process?
All the above. The land that you would raise cattle on in South Korea, and the land you would raise it on in, say, Georgia, that the soil is different. The animal that can survive on that soil is different. It has different anatomical features. How it's raised, absolutely, like we talked about with grass and grain, is going to affect it. And then how it's processed. When a cow is processed, when bovine and all other kinds of animals come through, there are certain ways to do things that will affect, all the way down to when you're eating it on a plate, will affect the taste of it. How that animal is killed or slaughtered will affect, was it done? And there's so many technological ways to do it now. Was the meat kept warm? Was it allowed to bleed out? Did they add cooling to it while it was being separated into parts? All those things will affect the quality and the taste of it. And so it definitely starts at what are they eating when the animal's eating and growing, and what is the mother eating when it's nursing its calf? So all those things will affect it, and all the way through the process will determine your experience at the restaurant.
That makes a lot of sense. Wagyu, is it insanity to you, or do you think it's worth the price per bite?
Well, I tell you, I've had some Wagyu products, and it is not insanity to me. It is. I definitely can tell a difference. And I go up to an area up in northern Arkansas that there's a Wagyu producer up there that owns several restaurants, and his restaurants use the beef that he has. He provides his own product. And I can tell you, you eat one of his burgers or his Philly cheesesteak sandwiches or one of his steaks, and you will know you're in a different universe. It is totally different and awesome.
You're getting me hungry here. Question for you is, where do you buy your steak? Do you buy it online, or do you just go to Kroger? There's like Snake River Farms. There's some 44 farms. Great producers of high-end meat. What, as an expert, where do you go and source your cattle?
Your beef.
Well, and I'd caution people, I'm definitely not a steak expert. If you looked at my waistline, you might think differently, but I do love it. But I'm one of those folks that suffer from a disease where I like to try something new every single time. So I do want to find something good, but I definitely have gone down the road where I found something I didn't like, but in the search of, I want to try the next thing and the next thing. So for sure, I will go to the grocery store, look and see what they have, see where it came from. Ooh, I like that farm. I remember. I want to try this other one that I've never heard, haven't seen before. And a couple of our producers that we've invested in, they have their own online distribution, and so I've definitely tried those. And I speak from experience when I say you got to be careful when you cook a grass-fed steak if you can overdo it in a hurry. So I've suffered from that. Mistakes before. But yeah, like I said, I like to just try the next thing and the next thing and see where they are. Can something be shipped to me in Texas in the summer and survive that? And they're getting better at the packaging, and the answer is yes. And if that's seafood or beef or whatever, I want to know where the next thing is and just keep trying it.
No, that's amazing. And you said you like to try new things. The European Union, I think, just passed the guidelines for mass production of insects as a protein source. I've had crickets, I've had ants, I've eaten insects. What are your thoughts on insects as a protein source for the world?
I think it's, it's not a bad idea to seek out, have options. I like having options. Investors like having options. And so if there's a market for it right now, let's do it. If there's not a market for it, let's at least figure it out so that when Elon Musk is flying us to Mars on his cruiser ship and, you can't bring cows with you because they weigh so much. Well, let's eat some cricket energy bars or, so I'm sure a lot of people kind of cringe when they think about that. But as you mentioned, like when you travel the world, you try a lot of weird stuff. So it kind of desensitizes you a little bit to, eating a bug. Ugh. But, me personally, I'm not opposed to it at all. But if I'm sitting down and, I'm making the economical decision, am I going to buy this Wagyu bacon cheeseburger or am I going to buy this cricket salad? Right now I'm going to pick the cheeseburger. But, in the future, you've got to prepare for that growing population and space travel. You got to do all that stuff. So, I applaud the folks that are brave enough to take on that. They're pioneers in their industry, and that's something to be respected.
What is the craziest thing that you've eaten on your travels?
Oh man, gosh, that's tough. Some of the seafoods. Being a landlocked kind of guy my whole life, some of the seafoods have been interesting to me, whether we're turtles or eels or things like that. And then obviously when you're in the desert, you're eating some interesting things, whether it's animals, but they're just prepared differently. I would say the thing that I could, sticks out in my mind 100%, and I'll probably never, ever do it again, was some Icelandic friends of mine when we were in Afghanistan shared with me, it was like shark blubber, shark fat that had been fermented. And my body hurts now just talking about it. It was such a taste, and it was potent to say the least. So I probably won't do that one again. But that was probably the weirdest one I think I've had.
Well, I'll ask another question about cannabis and hemp. I mean, it's more than just recreational use, but also like there's pharmaceutical industry use for high quality hemp, cannabis oils. What are your thoughts on that sector growing into the U.S. ag sector?
It's probably a natural progression. It's one of those things through the evolution of the market. It's not going to be stopped. I mean, you can kind of ignore it if you want to, but I don't recommend that. We are, interested in those markets. Hemp for sure. We've already done some capital raises for hemp growing companies. Cannabis, we are not against it by any means. The problem is that the federal banking laws have not relaxed enough for that industry. So there are states that allow it, but there is too much still of a minefield when handling financial regulatory world. So we have not done a cannabis raise yet, and I stress the yet because it'll likely very much happen whenever the banking laws kind of catch up. For the hemp deals, the hemp world has had its ups and downs. There's a lot of excitement about it, so a lot of money starts to flow, and then people start to realize like, oh wait, this is actually not just super easy. You have to pay attention, and you have to monitor THC levels, and you have to play the regulatory field, and so I think a lot of investors have learned over the last couple of years that when they started very excited, and now they're starting to temper their excitement a little bit, going, ooh, wait, this industry has a long way to go to develop to be a little bit safer, especially compared to other ag products.
Well, going back to your company for the moment, and I appreciate you humoring my pedestrian questions, but you guys are doing some really interesting work on structuring. A lot of people don't think about opportunity zones in agriculture intersecting, but there probably are a tremendous amount of opportunity zones overlaid across the farming community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as the opportunity zone legislation came out, we were very excited about it because it was basically like this kind of vindication that our little startup company and its idea now had like presidential level signatures on this law. And so it was obviously a natural thing for us to flow into. So a lot of the opportunity zones that are out there, these, they were nominated by the states and then certified by the federal government. They're areas that are, low in population, most of them rural, but plenty of them in just kind of industrial urban areas. They have a measurement of what makes them an opportunity zone. And so since most of them were in the rural areas, farmers were already there. It's not like they moved there; they were already in the zones. And so it was an exciting thing to read about. Like, oh, here's this opportunity to move capital from people that are having success in investing, and they want to put it into somewhere else that they may have not invested in before. And so we definitely started up the Opportunity Zone Fund, specifically targeting sustainable agricultural businesses. And what we found was that investors were still very wary of locking their money up for 10 years. And so over time, as opportunity zones have rolled out, they've definitely lightened some of the requirements. And then I'm sure the next administration will take a look at them and move the needle one way or another. But investors, the opportunity zone funds that were having success and the projects that were having success over the last couple of years were projects that were likely already going to happen. And this was just an added benefit to them. As we tried to introduce ag into these and get some investors that wanted to put their capital gains at risk to hold for 10 years, they were quite, hesitant to do so. And so our fund has, taken in investment and deployed it. We've watched other ag funds that are having similar experiences we are. And so we hope that those regulations will adjust so to make it more incentive for investors to participate.
And you guys, have you guys also done conservation easements?
So that may be a component to one of the ag businesses, like when we do kind of our due diligence on a cattle ranch or a facility that's going to be built. We'll take a look at that with the producer, but those kinds of tactical decisions, with their what land they're purchasing and things, that is up to the business owner. That is up to the farmer. And so while we may provide some insider recommendation, we don't provide them legal advice. We don't provide them, financial advice other than, hey, this is what we think investors would be interested in. So yeah, we definitely have those conversations with producers, but we don't push on that button specifically from our stand.
And if people wanted to get educated on the ag sector and then start looking at making an investment, because a lot of investors want to self-educate before they, talk to a person like yourself. What are some news sources or who are some thought leaders that you follow that, our investors or our advisors can point people to self-educate?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of the web, I mean, we're an online company as well. And so, obviously it's a shameless plug to, hey, come read our blogs, because that kind of points you, we have plenty of links to things that'll take you down some rabbit holes. I mean, just simple searches through YouTubes and Googles and things like that. You will find a lot of information, whether or not it's quality, that will be up to the viewer or the listener or the reader to decide. But for sure, our website can point you in the direction. We, for me personally, and kind of my role in the company, I just pay attention a lot to the different ag departments of each state. So like the Texas Department of Ag, the Maryland Department of Ag, the Washington Department of Ag. So those things at a state level will help me understand what's going on. And those offices, and typically the municipalities across the United States, are trying to help their farmers find capital. And so it helps to kind of connect the dots there. But there's plenty of information out there. Everyone, you want to make sure you're doing your own due diligence on them. We always stress that. Just make sure you're checking your sources.
And what does due diligence look like, for your investments? I mean, you guys obviously go do a site visit, but, do you check the health of the animals? Do you check the soil composition? Like, what does a due diligence checklist look like in your transactions?
Yeah, great question. We get that a lot from investors. So being that we're marketing the offering to the investor, we are very transparent to them. Like, this is what our level of due diligence has been. Like, we'll list it out in each of the offerings saying, we have checked X, Y, and Z. We recommend you do your own level. So from our standpoint, as we're marketing and offering, site visits whenever we can. Obviously, it's a little more difficult if we're talking to a sheep farmer in Australia or the cocoa farmer in Ghana to get out there. But we've definitely reached out and utilized some third party folks to help us on things like site visits. Other things that we've found, we've done our research on how other assets do their due diligence and figured some of our own kind of standard operating procedures. But we want to know, what is the team what is the makeup of the team that's going to run these businesses? What is their background? If you are trying to do a very technology-based growing system, is anyone on the team had that kind of experience or have some kind of tech background? If you want to be a cattle producer, have you ever even seen a cow? Like, so that, there's a lot of things like that. The team matters. Investors come at an investment, they're going to look at the numbers for sure, but they want to see the people that's doing it. They want to have some kind of connection to them. So that's a big one. Of course, obviously we're looking at things like, credit histories and if there's any kind of financial distress in their past. But we also do kind of compliance wise, we have to do kind of bad actor checks and anti-money laundering checks. Those are the normal for, any kind of private equity world. You got to make sure that they kind of pass the bill there. And then we just, we're doing analysis of their market. Do they have offtake agreements? Do their numbers make sense? Because I can reach out to the bleeding hearts all day long, but if the numbers don't make sense, no one's going to pull the trigger and write a check for that offering. So we provide just kind of a list to all the investors, like, hey, here's everything we looked at, and we recommend you do your own as well.
Yep. No, that's very interesting. So are you, since the last year or looking into 21, are there any books that you've recently read or any podcasts that you listen to?
Oh gosh, we definitely, between the company, we kind of pass them around, like, hey, I'll listen to this one, I'll listen to that one. Just my personal preference, because we've got plenty of people looking higher levels up. I like listening to the local farmer kind of podcast, because there'll be a lot of stuff in there that doesn't affect me, but there'll be a nugget of information there or a datum that I will want to hone in on. And so, like I said, I kind of search through YouTube and just find kind of a local farmer that is just trying to get his story out there in kind of mainstream online news or the world. So that's just my personal preference. I like to just look around. It's like going through the record store and like combing through the vinyls. I just want to go find something that no one else knows.
Fantastic. Well, this is in season 3, kind of our last few questions are really more kind of yes or no questions, whatever comes to your mind first. And we ask the same set of questions to all of our guests. So I'll just start throwing them out, and you can put as much context around the yes or no as you'd like, but here we go. So now that we have a vaccine on the horizon, would you take it right now, or have you taken one?
I have not, and I personally I have no desire to.
Fair enough. 2021, is it going to be a recession or an American recovery?
I'm going to lean towards recovery. And just from my foxhole, 2020, Harvest Returns had a record year, tripled its revenue, raised over $10 million. So from our standpoint, we're going to do very well.
And so what is your number one goal for 2021?
2021 is just exposure, letting people know this exists. There's a way to do this. We have found it, and please come use it.
Fantastic. Well, Austin, keep up the good work. Can you give us your website one more time so listeners can find it?
So come at us at harvestreturns.com, and you will find the pathways to some quality ag offerings and a lot of information about investing in ag if you're new to it. Just come say hey to us, give us a call, reach out to us, email us. We'd love to hear from everybody.
Fantastic. Austin, thanks for being on the show today. We appreciate your insights and hope to have you back in the months ahead.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you by StatusJet. Elevate your status. Fly anywhere, anytime, and experience the difference. Visit statusjet.com to charter your private jet today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Non-Beta Alpha. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube so you never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or simply share this episode with your friends. And now you know.
All price references and market forecasts correspond to the date of this recording. This podcast should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced in whole or in part. The information contained in this podcast does not constitute research or recommendation from Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Wentworth Management Services LLC, or any of their affiliates to the listener. Neither Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Wentworth Management Services LLC, nor any of their affiliates make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or any information contained in this podcast, and any liability, therefore including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage is expressly disclaimed. The views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily those of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC, and Non-Beta Alpha Inc. and Wentworth Management Services LLC are not providing any financial, economic, legal, accounting, or tax advice or recommendations in this podcast. In addition, the receipt of this podcast by any listener is not to be taken as constituting the giving of investment advice by Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC to that listener, nor to constitute such person a client of any affiliate of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Wentworth Management Services LLC. This does not constitute an offer to buy or sell any security. Investments in security may not be suitable for all investors. An investment of any security may involve risk and the potential loss of your initial investment. Investors should review all risk factors before investing. Investors should perform their own due diligence before considering any investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investment products, insurance, and annuity products are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, not insured by a federal government agency, may lose value.